Imagine this, you're crouched in a narrow ditch, barely wide enough for two people to pass by each other. The walls are made of mud, sandbags, and whatever materials you could scrounge together. Above your head, the constant whistle of bullets cuts through the air, and in the distance, you can hear the thunderous boom of artillery shells exploding. This isn't a movie set or a video game, this was the daily reality for millions of soldiers during World War II. Today, we're going to take you on a journey through time to experience what it was really like to spend 24 hours in a World War II trench. From the bone-chilling cold of a European winter morning to the terrifying sounds of battle at night, we'll explore the harsh realities that our grandfathers and great-grandfathers faced on the front lines. But before we dive in, make sure to hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell, because we've got amazing historical content coming your way every week. First, let's understand what we're dealing with here. World War II trenches weren't just simple ditches in the ground, they were complex networks of interconnected passages, bunkers, and defensive positions. Unlike the more famous trench warfare of World War I, World War II trenches were often temporary defensive positions, hastily dug during battles or used to hold strategic locations. A typical trench was about 6 to 8 feet deep and 3 to 4 feet wide. The front wall, called the parapet, faced the enemy and was reinforced with sandbags, logs, or steel plates. The back wall, known as the parados, protected soldiers from attacks from behind. Wooden boards called duckboards were placed at the bottom to keep soldiers' feet out of the mud and water that constantly accumulated. These trenches were connected by communication trenches that allowed soldiers to move between positions without exposing themselves to enemy fire. Support trenches further back provided places for supplies, medical aid, and rest areas. The whole system was designed with one goal in mind: survival. Now, let's step into the boots of a soldier and experience what a full day and night in these trenches was really like. Our 24-hour journey begins at dawn, and there's a reason soldiers called this the hour of fear. Dawn and dusk were when most attacks happened because the low light made it harder to see clearly, giving attackers an advantage. As the first light creeps over the horizon, you're already awake. Sleep was nearly impossible anyway, with the constant noise of war and the uncomfortable conditions. Your uniform is damp from the morning dew, and your boots are caked with mud from the trench floor. The smell hits you immediately, a mixture of unwashed bodies, cigarette smoke, rotting food, and something much worse that you try not to think about. The first order of business is stand to. Everyone in the trench has to be at their positions, weapons ready, watching for any sign of enemy movement. Your rifle feels heavy in your hands, and your fingers are so cold you can barely feel the trigger. The soldier next to you whispers a joke to break the tension, but his voice shakes slightly. Everyone's scared, but nobody wants to admit it. As you peer over the parapet through a small gap between sandbags, you can see the devastated landscape in front of you. Shell craters filled with murky water dot the ground like a moonscape. Twisted metal and debris are scattered everywhere, and you try not to look too closely at the shapes that might once have been human. Once the immediate danger of dawn passes, it's time for what passes as breakfast in the trenches. If you're lucky, you might get some hot coffee or tea delivered from the rear lines. More likely, you're eating cold canned rations, maybe some beef stew that's been sitting in your pack for days, or hard biscuits that you have to soak in water just to make them edible. Water is precious and often contaminated, so you have to purify it with tablets that make it taste like chemicals. But it's better than getting sick from dirty water, which could be a death sentence in these conditions. You eat quickly, always keeping your rifle within reach, because an attack could come at any moment. After breakfast comes trench maintenance, and this is a never-ending job. The walls are constantly collapsing from rain, explosions, and the simple weight of the earth above. You spend hours reinforcing sections with sandbags, replacing wooden supports that have rotted or been damaged, and digging out areas that have filled with mud and debris. This isn't just busy work, your life depends on these walls staying strong. A collapsed section could trap you during an attack, or worse, create an opening for enemy soldiers to break through your lines. Every shovelful of dirt you move could be the difference between life and death. The work is backbreaking, especially when you're already exhausted and malnourished. Your hands are raw and bleeding from handling rough materials without proper gloves. But you keep working because stopping isn't an option. By noon, the sun is high overhead, and if you're fighting in a hot climate, the temperature in the trench becomes unbearable. The narrow walls trap heat like an oven, and your heavy wool uniform becomes soaked with sweat. If you're in a cold climate, the sun provides little warmth as it filters down into your muddy hole in the ground. This is when the psychological warfare really begins. It's quiet, too quiet. You know the enemy is out there, probably in trenches just like yours, maybe only a few hundred yards away. Sometimes you can even hear them talking, laughing, or moving equipment. It's a strange thought that these people trying to kill you are probably just as scared and homesick as you are. The waiting is almost worse than the fighting. When bullets are flying, you're too busy to think about anything except survival. But during these quiet hours, your mind starts to wander. You think about home, about your family, about whether you'll ever see them again. Some soldiers write letters during these moments, letters that might never be sent, but writing them helps keep hope alive. You clean your rifle for the third time today, not because it needs cleaning, but because it gives your hands something to do. The soldier next to you shows you a picture of his sweetheart back home, her face smiling up from a cracked and dirty photograph. These small human connections are what keep you sane in this inhuman place. Suddenly, the quiet is shattered by a sound that makes your blood run cold, the incoming whistle of artillery shells. Someone shouts, "Incoming," and you dive for the deepest part of the trench, pressing yourself against the earth wall as tightly as you can. The first explosion hits about 50 yards to your left, sending dirt and debris raining down on you. Then another, closer this time. The ground shakes with each impact, and the sound is so loud it feels like your eardrums might burst. You can't hear anything except ringing, but you can feel the vibrations in your chest as shell after shell explodes around your position. This barrage goes on for what feels like hours but is probably only 20 minutes. When it finally stops, you slowly lift your head and look around. A section of trench about 30 yards down has taken a direct hit. Where there used to be a defensive position, there's now just a smoking crater. You hope the soldiers there made it to a bunker in time, but the silence from that direction doesn't give you much hope. The attack that follows the barrage is swift and terrifying. Enemy soldiers appear at the edge of no man's land, running in a zigzag pattern toward your trench. You raise your rifle and fire, working the bolt action as fast as your numb fingers will allow. The noise is incredible, rifles cracking, machine guns chattering, men shouting orders and screaming in pain. The whole firefight lasts maybe 10 minutes, but it feels like a lifetime. When the smoke clears, the attackers have retreated, leaving behind dark shapes in the mud that you try not to think about too much. As the sun begins to set, the true cost of the afternoon's fighting becomes clear. Several soldiers in your section are wounded, and one didn't make it at all. The medic, a young man barely out of high school, works frantically to patch up the injured with limited supplies. You help carry a wounded soldier to the aid station in a rear trench. He's been hit in the leg by shrapnel, and he grips your hand tightly as you transport him. He keeps asking if he's going to be okay, if he'll be able to walk again. You tell him yes, of course he will, even though you're not sure. Sometimes lying is a kindness. The aid station is a nightmare of overwhelmed medical staff and insufficient supplies. Wounded soldiers lie on stretchers in the mud, waiting for treatment or evacuation to field hospitals further behind the lines. The smell of antiseptic can't mask the smell of blood and infection. You're grateful when you can return to your section of trench. Back at your position, you help redistribute ammunition and supplies. Everything is running low: bullets, food, medical supplies, even sandbags for repairs. A supply run is planned for later tonight, but those missions are dangerous. Moving supplies to frontline trenches means crossing open ground under cover of darkness, hoping enemy snipers don't spot you. As darkness falls, a different kind of fear sets in. Nighttime in the trenches is when your imagination becomes your worst enemy. Every sound could be an enemy patrol trying to infiltrate your lines. That rustle in the grass might be the wind, or it might be someone crawling toward your trench with a grenade. You're assigned to guard duty, which means staying awake and alert for the next 4 hours while others try to get some rest. You peer into the darkness through a small gap in the sandbags, your rifle ready, trying to distinguish between shadows and shapes that might be moving. The night is full of sounds that make your heart race: distant explosions from other parts of the front, the occasional crack of a sniper's rifle, the low murmur of your fellow soldiers talking quietly to stay awake. Sometimes you hear wounded men calling out from no man's land, soldiers from both sides who fell during the day's fighting and couldn't be retrieved. Those cries get quieter as the night goes on, and eventually they stop altogether. Around midnight, you hear movement in the darkness ahead. Your grip tightens on your rifle as you try to determine if it's friendly or enemy. The password system helps. If challenged, friendly soldiers should respond with the correct countersign. But smart enemies sometimes learn these passwords, so you can never be completely sure. A flare suddenly lights up the night sky, casting eerie shadows across the battlefield and turning everything an unnatural green color. In the brief illumination, you can see the devastated landscape clearly, and thankfully, no sign of enemy movement. The flare burns out, leaving your night vision ruined for several minutes. As our 24-hour journey in a World War II trench comes to an end, it's important to remember that this was just one day. Soldiers often spent weeks or even months in these conditions, never knowing if today would be their last, never getting enough sleep, food, or warmth. These men weren't superheroes from a movie, they were ordinary people, many of them just teenagers, who found themselves in extraordinary circumstances. They were scared, cold, hungry, and homesick, but they persevered because they believed in something bigger than themselves. The trenches of World War II were places where boys became men, where friendships were forged that would last a lifetime, and where countless acts of heroism happened that will never be recorded in history books. They were also places of incredible loss and suffering that shaped an entire generation. Today, we live in freedom because of the sacrifices made by these soldiers in muddy trenches across Europe, the Pacific, and other theaters of war. Their stories remind us that freedom isn't free, and that ordinary people can do extraordinary things when faced with the ultimate test. If you found this video educational, please give it a thumbs up and share it with others who appreciate history. And don't forget to subscribe for more content about the real experiences of people throughout history. Until next time, remember to appreciate the comfortable, safe world that these brave soldiers helped create for us. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next video.